To escape the bitter cold, homeless twin sisters begin caring for an elderly billionaire who is confined to a wheelchair. As they spend their days by her side, an astonishing truth emerges and changes everything. Snow fell silently that winter night, covering the town in a cold jar white blanket. In the main square, the clock's hands pointed to 9 o'clock, and the digital thermometer outside the local bank flashed relentlessly, 23 degrees Celsius. The cutting wind blew through the empty streets, making the bare trees dance a grim waltz. On a bench covered in snow, two identical little figures huddled together beneath a thin, tattered blanket. Anne and Marie, 5-year-old twins, clung tightly to each other, trying to share the tiny bit of warmth their frail bodies still produced. Their shoes, found in a donation box 3 days prior, were soaked. Their thin coats did little to shield them from the cold that seemed to pierce their skin and freeze their bones. "Anne, I'm so cold," Marie whispered, her lips turning blue as she spoke. Her stomach growled, reminding them both they'd had nothing more than half a piece of stale bread since morning. "Shh, I know," Anne replied, pulling her sister closer. "Look over there. That big house has lights. It must be warm inside." On the other side of the square stood an imposing mansion, like a towering stone giant. Its lit windows glowed in the darkness like golden eyes, and through them, the girls could glimpse an interior that seemed straight out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers, thick carpets, elegant furniture, and the cozy warmth of several lit fireplaces. But what truly captured the twins' attention was a lone figure near the main window. An elderly woman in a wheelchair, her hair white as the snow outside, remained perfectly still, gazing at the garden with distant eyes. She was Mrs. Rose Laurent, the owner of the mansion, though the girls didn't know her name. "She looks sad," Marie observed, momentarily forgetting her own discomfort. "Just like Mom used to." Anne swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. A week had passed since their mother had left them on that bench. "Wait here, my little ones," Catherine had said, her voice trembling. "Mommy's going to find food and come right back." But she never returned, and the twins, too young to understand abandonment, kept waiting, surviving on the occasional kindness of strangers. Inside the mansion, Thomas watched his employer with growing concern. In 30 years as the Laurent family's butler, he had never seen her so lost in thought as she had been in recent months. Mrs. Rose spent hours in that same position, as if searching for something in the garden shadows that only she could see. "Madam," he approached gently, "it's getting quite late. The temperature has dropped considerably." She didn't respond immediately. Her wrinkled fingers were stroking an old golden brooch pinned to her wool blouse, a gesture Thomas had noticed becoming more frequent lately. "You know, Thomas," her voice came out low, almost a whisper, "sometimes I wonder how many sad stories exist beyond these walls. How many lives are out there? They're missing something." The butler adjusted the shawl around his employer's shoulders. "I'll check the weather before locking up for the night," he announced, heading to the main door. The icy wind slapped him like a harsh blow when he opened the heavy oak door. That was when he saw them, two small silhouettes shivering violently on the bench in the square. For a moment, Thomas stood paralyzed. In 3 decades of service, he had learned to maintain discretion above all else, but the sight of those children stirred something in him, stronger than his training. One of the girls coughed, a weak, painful sound that echoed through the silent night. The other clung to her even more tightly, and from that distance, Thomas could see their blue lips. Something inside him, perhaps the very feeling he had just heard in Mrs. Rose's voice, pushed him to make a decision. He knew his employer had her rules, her meticulously organized routine, her preference for solitude. But he also knew he couldn't, in good conscience, let those children freeze to death when there were empty rooms and warm fireplaces just steps away. With determined steps, he crossed the garden. The twins, noticing his approach, shrank back, a reflex they had learned on the streets. "Hello," he said softly, crouching down to their level. "My name is Thomas. You two look terribly cold." We can't leave here," Anne replied, still holding Marie protectively. "Our mom told us to wait." Thomas felt his heart ache. I understand. But how about we wait inside, where it's warm, just until the cold passes? The girls looked at each other, sharing a silent conversation only twins seem capable of having. Marie coughed again, and seeing her sister shivering harder, Anne relented. Is there food in there? She asked quietly. Yes, Thomas answered with a gentle smile. We've got hot soup in the kitchen, and maybe even hot chocolate. As he guided the trembling little figures toward the mansion, Thomas wondered how he would explain this to Mrs. Rose. His employer did not like changes or surprises. Her days followed a precise routine, and visitors, especially children, were not part of it. But something told him tonight would be different. Perhaps it was the way the twins leaned on each other, reminding him of old photographs he'd seen in Mrs. Rose's dusty albums. Or maybe it was simply fate, choosing this cold night to change the course of multiple lives. What Thomas didn't know, as he opened the door for Anne and Marie, was that this decision would not only save 2 children from the cold, it would also thaw the heart of a woman who had long ago stopped believing in new beginnings. On the other side of the window, Mrs. Rose watched the scene unfold, her fingers still stroking the old brooch, and for the first time in a very long while, something shifted in her gaze. The warmth of the mansion enveloped the twins like an embrace after the biting cold outside. The entrance hall, with its marble floor and walls panelled in dark wood, seemed enormous to little Anne and Marie. A crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, casting golden shadows that danced on the walls. Wait here a moment, Thomas requested, helping them remove their soaked coats. Their dresses, though dirty and worn, still retained a hint of dignity, as if preserving memories of better days. Marie clung to her sister's hand when Thomas walked away. The two remained exactly where he had indicated, like small statues, their wide eyes taking in every detail of the opulent surroundings. Madame, Thomas entered the room where his employer still gazed at the snow-covered garden. Forgive my intrusion, but you brought them inside, Mrs. Rose interrupted, her voice neutral. It wasn't a question. Yes, Madame. They were nearly frozen, and how old are they? She asked, still not turning around. About 5. They're twins. Something imperceptible changed in Mrs. Rose's posture. Her fingers, which had been stroking the brooch, paused for an instant. Bring them here. Thomas hesitated briefly. In 30 years, he had never seen his employer allow children into her private quarters. In fact, ever since her nurse quit the previous week, Mrs. Rose hardly allowed anyone inside besides him. The twins entered the room hand in hand, their hesitant steps leaving small puddles on the Persian rug. Anne instinctively moved half a step in front of her sister. Mrs. Rose slowly turned her wheelchair around. Her face, lined with the years but still bearing traces of an old beauty, remained impassive as she studied the girls. Her deep blue eyes, which time had failed to dull, seemed to be searching for something in the identical faces before her. Come closer, she said. Though her tone was firm, it sounded less cold than usual. The twins advanced cautiously in the glow of the fireplaces. Their pale faces and slightly purplish lips revealed the hours they'd spent in the freezing cold. Which of you is which? Mrs. Rose asked. I'm Anne, replied the one standing slightly in front. And this is my sister Marie. Where is your mother? Marie squeezed Anne's hand, so Anne answered softly. She said she'd be back. When? It's been a week, Anne swallowed hard. But she's coming back. She promised. Mrs. Rose exchanged a meaningful look with Thomas. Their many years together allowed a silent communication that required no words. Are you hungry? She asked, surprising Thomas with the gentleness in her voice. Both girls nodded timidly. Thomas, please get some hot soup and hot chocolate, and dry towels. She paused, noticing the girls' wet dresses. And see if we still have those old clothes in the attic. There might be something that fits them. Once Thomas left, Mrs. Rose continued to observe the twins. There was something about them, maybe the way they stuck together, or how Anne protected Marie, that sparked memories she had long buried. "Do you know how to read?" she asked suddenly. "Yes, ma'am," Anne replied. "Our mom taught us. Marie is better at it than I am." A faint hint of a smile touched the old woman's lips. "See that book on the little table? Can you bring it to me?" Marie released her sister's hand and moved toward the table. It was a book of stories, its pages yellowed by time. She handed it to Mrs. Rose with reverent care. "Read it to me," the elderly woman said, returning the book, "while we wait for the soup." The girls glanced at each other in surprise. Marie opened the book with trembling fingers and started to read, her small voice gaining confidence with every word, and occasionally helped with harder words. Thomas returned with a tray to a scene he never imagined he would witness, the two girls seated on the rug, near Mrs. Rose's wheelchair, reading aloud, while his employer listened with an expression he hadn't seen in decades. "Madame," he cleared his throat gently, "dinner is served." The twins stopped reading, their stomachs growling at the smell of hot soup. Mrs. Rose watched them eat, noting their surprisingly polite manners despite their obvious hunger. "Thomas," she called as the girls finished their soup, "my nurse quit last week." "Yes, madam." "And you've been looking for a replacement?" "Without success so far, madam." Mrs. Rose fell silent for a moment, her fingers once more stroking the brooch. "Perhaps," she finally said, "we don't need a nurse after all." Thomas raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Madam, these girls," she gestured toward the twins, who were now fighting to stay awake, warmed and fed for the first time in days. "They need a place to stay, and I need help with a few simple tasks, straightening my blankets, reading to me, keeping me company." "But they're only children, madam." "Exactly," she answered, a different light in her eyes. "Children are honest. They don't have hidden agendas. And these two—" She paused, observing how Anne placed a cushion behind Marie, who was already dozing off, seemed to have a natural gift for caring. Thomas realized what was happening. In all his years of service, he had never seen Mrs. Rose show such interest in anyone. Something about these twins had touched a deep part of his employer, which he suspected was linked to that ever-present brooch. "Would you like to stay?" Mrs. Rose asked the girls directly. Anne, the only one still awake, looked at her with wide eyes. "You could help me during the day, and in exchange you'd have a warm room, food, clean clothes." "And what if our mom comes back?" Anne asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Then we'll know exactly where to find you," Mrs. Rose answered, her voice softening. "What do you think?" Anne looked at her sleeping sister, at the dancing flames in the fireplace, at the hot chocolate in her hands. Then, with a maturity far beyond her 5 years, she nodded. "Great," Mrs. Rose declared. "Thomas, prepare the blue room for them. And tomorrow, we'll take care of some proper clothes." As Thomas carried the sleeping Marie and guided Anne upstairs, Mrs. Rose turned her gaze back to the window. Snow was still falling outside, but inside the mansion, something had changed. A change she hadn't planned, but which somehow felt inevitable. Her fingers touched the brooch once more, and for the first time in years, Mrs. Rose Laurent felt something she had long forgotten: hope. Morning sunlight illuminated the Laurent mansion's conservatory, creating a kaleidoscope of colors through the century-old stained glass windows. Marie knelt beside a crystal vase, her small hands moving with surprising gentleness among the flowers. 1 week in the mansion had transformed the twins. Their once pale cheeks now glowed with color, and their new clothes replaced the rags they wore when they arrived. "No, not like that," Marie murmured to herself, moving a rose. Her keen eyes studied the arrangement with a seriousness that made Thomas smile discreetly. "Where did you learn to do that, little one?" he asked, approaching with a watering can. Marie bit her lip, focused. "I saw it in the paintings," she answered simply, pointing to the artwork on the walls. "Mrs. Rose has a lot of paintings with flowers. I watch how they're arranged." Across the mansion, Anne was helping Mrs. Rose organize an old bookshelf. The elderly woman, sitting in her wheelchair, pointed out which books should be dusted and put back. "This one is very special," Mrs. Rose remarked, picking up a leather-bound volume in blue. They're stories I read when I was about your age. Anne took the book reverently, her eyes lighting up at the colorful illustrations. Do you still like stories? A nearly imperceptible smile touched the old woman's lips. Very much. But my eyes aren't what they used to be. I can read to you, Anne offered eagerly. Mom used to say I'm a really good reader. A flicker of emotion crossed the elderly woman's eyes, an emotion she swiftly concealed. I would like that, she answered softly. Days at the Laurent mansion followed a new routine. In the mornings, while Marie tended the flowers, Anne helped Thomas with Mrs. Rose's medication. The girl had an impressive memory for schedules and dosages, soon taking on the responsibility of reminding everyone when each medicine was due. In the afternoons, Mrs. Rose began showing the twins the mansion's hidden treasures. There was an entire room dedicated to antique dolls, each with its own story. Marie was particularly enchanted by a porcelain doll dressed as a ballerina. This one, Mrs. Rose explained, came from France many years ago. It belonged to my grandmother. The girls absorbed every word with fascination, taking in not only the stories but also the softer tone Mrs. Rose used whenever she spoke of the past. A particularly special discovery happened when Mrs. Rose took them to the attic. Among old trunks and covered furniture, they found a collection of vintage dresses. Look, Anne, Marie exclaimed, holding a blue silk dress against her body. It looks like a princess dress. Mrs. Rose watched the girls try on old hats and gloves, and for the first time in years, a laugh escaped her lips, a sound that made Thomas downstairs drop the tea tray in sheer amazement. At night, a new tradition emerged. Anne discovered by accident that Mrs. Rose had trouble sleeping. Insomnia had plagued her for years, keeping her awake through the night. My mum always sang to us at bedtime, Anne mentioned one night, adjusting the elderly woman's blankets. Want me to sing for you? Mrs. Rose hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Anne's sweet voice filled the room with an old lullaby, and for the first time in decades, the elderly woman fell asleep without her sleeping pills. As the days passed, Thomas noticed small changes. Hallways once silent now echoed with soft footsteps and barely contained laughter. The conservatory, which had been more like a stagnant display of neglected plants, now thrived under Marie's care. Mrs. Rose was changing too. Her orders, once curt and direct, now came with please and thank you. She started taking her tea in the conservatory, watching Marie work with the flowers. In the afternoons, she could be found in the library, listening to Anne read out loud, occasionally correcting a tricky word. One afternoon, while Marie was arranging a new bouquet, she began to hum a tune. Mrs. Rose, chilled nearby in her wheelchair, suddenly became very alert. Where did you learn that song? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Anne taught me, Marie said, adjusting a daisy. She says our mum used to sing it when we were babies. Mrs. Rose fell silent for a long moment, her fingers touching something on her blouse the girls could not see. Come with me, she said at last. I want to show you something. Thomas, watching from a distance, noticed a shift in his employer's tone. It was as though she had made an important decision, one he suspected would forever change life in the mansion. As they followed Mrs. Rose down the hall, the twins holding hands as always, the butler sensed that winter was finally melting away, not just outside, but in the hearts of those who lived within the Laurent mansion. Mrs. Rose guided her wheelchair into her personal bedroom, a space the twins had not been fully allowed to explore. It was an elegant room, with walls in soft sea-green wallpaper and antique mahogany furniture gleaming in the afternoon light coming through tall windows. Anne, sweetheart, Mrs. Rose called, positioning her chair in front of an old vanity. Could you brush my hair while we talk? Anne picked up the silver brush with a sculpted handle, an item that seemed to have its own story to tell. Gently, she began running it through the elderly woman's silver hair, just as her mom had taught her. 100 strokes for a lady's hair, Anne murmured to herself, focused on the task. Marie, ever curious, wandered around the room admiring the various objects. Her eyes lingered on the old photographs on the walls, the perfume bottles on the vanity, the neatly arranged books on the shelves. "What did you want to show us?" Marie asked, stopping at an antique mahogany cabinet. Mrs. Rose smiled faintly, watching the girl in the mirror's reflection. "There's something kept in that cabinet. There's a little hidden door at the bottom." Marie knelt down, her small fingers quickly finding the latch. With a soft click, the door opened, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a music box, resting on a piece of faded blue velvet. "May I?" Marie asked, her eyes shining with fascination. "Mrs. Rose nodded, her expression softening as she watched Marie's careful handling of the box. It was a beautiful piece of dark wood, inlaid with mother-of-pearl in delicate rose patterns. On the lid, golden letters formed the initials R.L. "It belonged to my grandmother," Mrs. Rose explained, her voice heavy with memories. "Rose Laurent, the first. I was named after her." Anne paused in her brushing, absorbing the story. "So your name is also Rose Laurent?" "Yes," the elderly woman said. "And my grandmother, she loved flowers as much as our little Marie does." Marie, still holding the box reverently, found the small golden key on its side. With a smooth motion, she turned it 3 times. A crystalline melody filled the room, Clair de Lune, as if the music manifested memories in the air. "That song," Anne whispered, her eyes widening. "Our mum sang that to us." Mrs. Rose went very still, only her fingers moving slightly as though conducting an invisible orchestra. That was when Marie discovered the secret compartment beneath the box. Her nimble fingers almost found the hidden latch by instinct, and with a soft snap, a tiny drawer opened. Inside lay an old photograph, its yellowed edges betraying the passage of time. The image showed a young Mrs. Rose, radiant in a light-colored dress, holding a newborn baby. A golden rose-shaped brooch sparkled on her chest. "That's you," Marie exclaimed, bringing the photo closer for a better look. Anne set down the brush and moved closer, both girls now peering at the photo. In the picture, Mrs. Rose looked so young, so full of hope and life. Her eyes, even in black and white, seemed to have a sparkle the girls had never seen in the present-day woman they knew. It was then they noticed the silent tears running down the elderly woman's face. Thomas, who had entered quietly with afternoon tea, froze in the doorway at the charged atmosphere. "The baby?" Marie asked softly. "Who is she?" Mrs. Rose took a shaky breath, her trembling hands in her lap. "My baby," she replied simply, her voice thick with emotion. That was the only time I ever held her. Anne and Marie exchanged confused looks. The pain in Mrs. Rose's voice was so deep that Marie instinctively climbed onto her lap, while Anne held her wrinkled hand. "Why?" Anne asked quietly. "Because sometimes," Mrs. Rose answered, stroking Marie's hair, "families make choices for others, choices that hurt us our entire lives." The music box continued to play its mournful melody, filling the weighted silence with notes of an old sorrow. "Our mum also keeps a photo like this," Marie commented innocently, still nestled in Mrs. Rose's lap. "A baby picture of her with us." The elderly woman smiled sadly. "Always keep that photo," she advised. "Photos are memories you can touch." Thomas watched, his heart tight. In 3 decades, he had never seen his employer speak, albeit indirectly, about that chapter of her past. "You know," Mrs. Rose continued, her voice quieter now, "every object tells a story. This music box, for instance, belonged to my grandmother." She stopped abruptly. Marie, shifting on her lap, had caused her little cloth pouch to slip from around her neck, revealing its contents. On the carpet, shining against the dark rug, was a golden brooch, identical to the one Mrs. Rose wore in the photograph. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the music box seemed to hush its melody. Mrs. Rose locked her gaze on the brooch, her breathing visibly altered. Thomas stepped forward, worried by her sudden pallor. "That brooch," she began, but her voice faltered. "It's our only family heirloom," Anne explained, picking it up from the floor. Our mum said it was really important, that we should always keep it with us. Mrs. Rose extended a trembling hand, barely touching the piece, as though afraid it might vanish at any moment. "Thomas," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas, do you see this?" The butler approached, his own composure shaken when he recognized the jewellery. It was impossible not to. It was identical to the one Mrs. Rose had clung to for 50 years, ever since that day that changed her life forever. "Yes, madam," he replied softly. "I see it." The twins looked on, not fully understanding, but sensing that something important was happening. "It's a very pretty brooch," Marie offered, trying to ease the sudden tension. "Yes," Mrs. Rose answered, finally touching the piece with her fingertips. "It's very special, more special than you can imagine." Thomas realized his employer needed a moment. "Girls," he called gently, "how about helping in the kitchen? Martha is making chocolate cookies." Though reluctant, as the twins followed him, leaving Mrs. Rose alone with the old photo, the music box, and a brooch that, after 50 years, was dragging back memories she thought she'd lost forever. When Thomas returned a few minutes later, he found his employer still staring at the brooch, silent tears streaming down her face. "Is it possible, Thomas?" she asked, not lifting her eyes. "After so long—" The butler didn't reply. Some questions are too heavy for an immediate answer. Some truths need time to fully emerge. Outside, dusk began to fall, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the same colors of the brooch that, like a long-lost key, was beginning to unlock doors that had been shut for 50 years. The Laurent mansion slept under the night sky, but a light still burned in the second-floor library. For the third consecutive evening, Thomas found Mrs. Rose awake late, poring over old diaries and documents yellowed with age. "More tea, madam?" he offered, noting the deep circles under her eyes. "Mrs." Rose merely nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the pages of an old journal. On the table in front of her, several opened boxes revealed their contents: old letters, official documents, and newspaper clippings. 50 years of meticulous searching. "I found this," she said softly, handing Thomas a piece of paper. It was a hospital note dated 1975. "It's from where everything happened." Thomas took the document carefully. In 3 decades of service, he had never seen his employer so openly sift through these memories. "You need rest," he suggested gently. "The girls will notice your exhaustion in the morning." The mention of the twins made Mrs. Rose lift her eyes from the diary. "They sleep so peacefully, Thomas, so innocent." Her voice shook. "Like my baby slept, that single night I had with her." Thomas set down the tea tray and allowed himself to sit, something he rarely did in her presence. But tonight was different. Tonight, 50 years of silence seemed about to break. "Tell me," he asked simply. "Mrs." Rose closed the diary in her lap, her fingers tracing its worn cover. "I was 18, she began, voice barely above a whisper. "It was a different time, Thomas. Getting pregnant out of wedlock was unforgivable." She paused, lost in memories. "My family sent me to a rest home as soon as my pregnancy became obvious. They said it was for my own good, to avoid scandal." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. As if the real scandal wasn't what they did afterward. Thomas poured more tea, giving her time to collect herself. "She was born on a winter night," Mrs. Rose continued. "So tiny, so perfect. They let me hold her just once, for that photo, you know." Her hands shook as she lifted the cup. "When I woke up the next morning, they had taken her away." "And the brooch?" Thomas asked gently. "It was all I could leave with her. I took it from my own dress and placed it beside the baby when they let me hold her. The other one stayed with me, a silent promise that one day we'd find each other." Thomas watched as she unconsciously touched the brooch on her blouse, a gesture he had seen thousands of times, yet only now did he fully understand its meaning. "I spent decades searching for her, Thomas. Hired detectives, combed adoption records, followed every lead." She gestured at the boxes spread across the library. "It's all here. 50 years of searching without answers." The butler thought of the twins sleeping upstairs, of the brooch they carried, identical to his employer's, of coincidences that felt too perfect to be mere chance. And now, Mrs. Rose continued, her voice trembling, 2 little girls show up at my door fleeing the cold, carrying the only object that could prove that might mean. She couldn't finish. Thomas stood to fetch a handkerchief, but a noise at the door caught his attention. Marie stood there, eyes wide with sleep and worry. Are you crying? The little girl asked, stepping into the room. Mrs. Rose quickly wiped her tears. No, dear, I'm just tired. When I'm sad, Marie said, approaching the wheelchair, Anne sings to me. Do you want me to wake her? Thomas saw his employer swallow hard, clearly fighting to maintain composure. That's not necessary, little one. It's late. You should be sleeping. Can I sleep here with you? Marie asked, already climbing into the elderly woman's lap. Just for a little bit. Before anyone could answer, the child had settled, her sleepy eyes heavy. Mrs. Rose remained still for a moment, then slowly began to stroke her hair. Thomas, she called softly, after a few minutes. Look! Marie had dozed off, and in her sleep she was instinctively clutching the brooch around her neck, exactly as Mrs. Rose clutched her own every night, a gesture Thomas had witnessed for years. The same movements, she whispered, silent tears trailing down her cheeks. She sleeps the same way. Thomas approached with a blanket, covering Marie gently. I'll prepare your room, madam. You need to rest too. But Mrs. Rose made no move to leave. She stayed there, cradling Marie quietly, as though trying to reclaim 50 years of missed embraces through the little one fate had brought to her door. On the desk, the open diary revealed a single line, written in the trembling handwriting of a young mother 50 years earlier. My love, wherever you are, the brooch will be our link. One day it will bring us back together. Outside, the night continued as usual, and in the Laurent Mansion's library, amidst boxes of memories and old promises, a grandmother cradled her possible granddaughter, while the butler kept silent vigil over that sacred moment of reunion, even though only one side fully understood the meaning of that embrace. Spring began to awaken in the Laurent Mansion's garden. Marie convinced Thomas to let her plant daisies in new flower beds, and now spent hours tending the first sprouts, pushing through the soil. Grandma Rose will love it when they bloom, she said absent-mindedly, carefully watering the beds. Thomas, trimming a nearby hedge, nearly dropped his shears. It was the first time he heard one of the girls call Mrs. Rose Grandma. Even more surprising was how naturally it slipped out. In the conservatory, Anne was reading aloud to Mrs. Rose, as they did every morning. The elderly woman watched the child intently, noting small gestures that seemed so familiar, the way she furrowed her brow at a difficult word, exactly as Mrs. Rose had done in her youth. Grandma, Anne interrupted her reading suddenly. This story reminds me of a picture Mom used to keep. Mrs. Rose felt her heart race. What picture, dear? An old one in black and white, Anne said, closing the book on her lap. Mom said it was her as a baby with her mom. She used to cry whenever she looked at it. Marie, who had just walked in carrying a small pot of her daisy sprouts, joined in. That's right. The picture was in a music box like yours, Grandma. Mrs. Rose exchanged a significant look with Thomas, who had just entered with afternoon tea. A music box, she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Yes, Marie continued, placing her pot on the side table. It played that song you like, the one Anne sings to help us sleep. Claire de Lune, Mrs. Rose whispered, her fingers automatically reaching for the brooch on her blouse. That's it, Anne exclaimed. Mum said it was a special tune her mum used to sing when she was a baby. Thomas observed his employer closely, seeing how she struggled to maintain composure. In 3 decades of service, he had learned to read every nuance of her expression. And that box, Mrs. Rose asked softly, where is it now? The girl's smiles faded. It was left at home, Anne answered quietly. When Mum left us on that bench, she only took the photo. She said she needed it. Marie climbed into Mrs. Rose's lap, as she always did when she sensed the elderly woman's sadness. But now we have you, Grandma, and your music box is even prettier." Mrs. Rose hugged the child, hiding the tears that were beginning to form. Anne joined the embrace from the other side of the wheelchair, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still in the Laurent Mansion's conservatory. Thomas backed away quietly toward the door, his heart heavy with emotion. The coincidences were too many. 2 identical brooches, 2 similar music boxes, an old photograph, even the girl's small gestures mirroring those of his employer. Later that night, after the twins had gone to bed, Mrs. Rose summoned Thomas to the library. "They called me Grandma today," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It felt so natural." "Yes, madam. I noticed with Marie in the garden." "Thomas," she continued, turning her wheelchair to face him, "do you recall the music box I gave along with the brooch?" "How could I forget, madam? It was the only thing you managed to leave with the baby." "It was unique," Mrs. Rose emphasized, "made especially for my grandmother in Paris. There was no other like it." A weighted silence fell, and the song Thomas Clair de Lune, it was the tune I sang throughout my pregnancy, the only one that soothed the baby. Thomas noticed that Mrs. Rose looked younger suddenly, as if hope could reverse time. "The girls," she went on, her voice barely a whisper, "they have so many of my traits, Thomas. The way Marie is with flowers, how Anne furrows her brow when reading, even how they sleep, hands tucked under their faces." "Madam, it can't be mere coincidence," she interrupted. "The brooch, the music box, their gestures. It's as if blood recognizes blood," Thomas finished softly. Mrs. Rose nodded, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. 50 years, Thomas. 50 years of searching, and now— A noise at the door interrupted them. It was Anne, wearing her new nightgown, eyes heavy with sleep. "Grandma, I can't sleep. Can you tell me a story?" Mrs. Rose discreetly wiped her tears. "Of course, dear. How about I tell you about the first Rose Laurent, my grandmother, and how she got a very special music box in Paris?" Anne smiled, climbing onto the elderly woman's lap as Thomas guided the wheelchair toward the twins' bedroom. On the way, they passed the conservatory, where Marie's new sprouts were beginning to peek out, small promises of blossoms that, like long-lost connections, were finally finding their way home. The next morning began like many others at the Laurent Mansion. Anne and Marie helped Thomas serve Mrs. Rose's breakfast in the conservatory, a routine they had established in recent weeks. Marie had just placed a fresh arrangement of daisies on the table, her first flowers from the garden, while Anne carefully arranged a napkin on the elderly woman's lap. "Your daisies look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Rose praised, making Marie beam with pride. The peaceful family moment was interrupted by movement in the garden. Thomas, ever watchful, was the first to notice a figure approaching the gates. It was a young woman, her dark hair disheveled and her worn clothes hinting at days, maybe weeks, on the streets. She walked hesitantly, her eyes fixed on the conservatory windows where the twins played without a care. "Thomas?" Mrs. Rose sensed his tension. "What's wrong?" Before he could answer, the woman drew closer, her face now visible through the glass. Mrs. Rose felt the air leave her lungs. It was like seeing a ghost, not her lost daughter, but something even more shocking, a younger version of herself. The twins, who had their backs to the window, sensed the sudden change in the room. When they turned, they screamed in unison. "Mum!" Marie dropped the water pitcher she was holding, sending shards of crystal and water across the floor. Anne reacted instinctively, pulling her sister behind Mrs. Rose's wheelchair. They huddled there just as they had so many times on the streets when they felt threatened. "My babies," the woman's raspy voice rang through the glass. "Please, let me see my babies." Thomas moved swiftly to the door, but Mrs. Rose stopped him with a gesture. Her eyes wouldn't leave the face of the young woman, those eyes exactly like her own. The same shape of face she'd had in her youth, even the same nervous fidgeting with her hands. "Let her in, Thomas," she ordered, her voice trembling slightly. Catherine entered the conservatory like a whirlwind of restrained emotion. Her eyes, red from crying, scanned the area until they landed on the twins, still hiding behind the wheelchair. "Anne, Marie. She took a step toward them, but stopped when they shrank back further. Please. Catherine turned to Mrs. Rose, dropping to her knees beside the wheelchair. I know I don't deserve it. I know I was awful, but they're my daughters. I've spent months searching for them, sleeping on the streets, asking around every corner. Her voice caught in her throat as she noticed the fresh bouquet of daisies on the table, the same flowers she used to grow with Marie in their tiny apartment. You're taking such good care of them, she observed, noticing the girl's clean clothes and rosy cheeks. Tears began streaming down her face. Better than I ever could. Mrs. Rose watched Catherine's every move, her own heart pounding. The young woman had no idea, but everything about her echoed the past. The way she wrung her hands when anxious, the tilt of her head when speaking, even her tone of voice. Why did you leave us? Anne's small voice asked from behind the wheelchair, heavy with hurt. Catherine sobbed. I couldn't take care of you both. I had no food. The rent was overdue. And after my mother died, I was lost. Mrs. Rose watched Catherine closely, noting how she twisted her hands exactly as she herself did when nervous. Something in her gestures, in her face, awakened deeply buried memories. Please, Catherine begged again. I know I don't deserve it, but may I at least talk to them, explain. Marie, always the more sensitive twin, peeked out from behind the wheelchair. Anne squeezed her hand, as she always did in tough moments. You abandoned us, Anne said, her small voice brimming with pain. You left us in the cold. I know, Catherine cried, falling to her knees. But I searched everywhere for you both. I slept in doorways, questioned people on every street corner. Mrs. Rose's voice intervened, her tone measured. Your mother, did she die recently? Yes, Catherine frowned, confused by the question. How did you know? And she had an old music box, with a golden brooch. Mrs. Rose pressed on. The brooch? Catherine looked around frantically. My girls, do you still have it? It was from Grandma Louise, the only thing she brought from the orphanage when she was a baby. She said it was special that one day. Her voice trailed off when she noticed for the first time the brooch on Mrs. Rose's chest, identical to the one she had left with her daughters. Silence fell like a thick curtain. Catherine stared at the brooch, then at Mrs. Rose's face, her mind struggling to connect impossible dots. The twins, sensing the shift in the air, stepped fully out from behind the wheelchair. Anne held Marie's hand as she always did during tense moments. Mom, Marie ventured, Grandma Rose has a music box just like Grandma Louise's. Catherine stumbled backward, leaning on Thomas for support. It can't be, she whispered, her face drained of color. It can't. Mrs. Rose reached out a trembling hand, gently touching Catherine's face, a gesture she'd waited 50 years to make. Your mother, she said softly, was born on a winter night. I only got to hold her once, for a single photo. I left her a golden brooch, my only way of one day finding her again. Thomas watched, his heart pounding. In 3 decades of service, he knew every expression on Mrs. Rose's face, and for the first time he saw shock, hope, and profound recognition all at once. Maybe, Mrs. Rose said at last, her voice steady despite the tears shining in her eyes. We can all have some tea and talk this through calmly. Catherine raised her eyes, surprised by the unexpected offer. The twins glanced at each other, still clinging to the wheelchair for security. Thomas, Mrs. Rose called, prepare some tea, please, and bring out the cookies the girls like. As the butler left, a heavy silence fell over the conservatory. The morning sun lit up Marie's daisy arrangement, those first flowers she had planted, quiet witnesses to a meeting that promised to reveal far more than any of them had anticipated. The tea grew cold in the porcelain cups, untouched. In the Laurent Mansion's conservatory, time seemed suspended in a painful moment of anticipation, the twins still hovering near Mrs. Rose's wheelchair, observed their mother with a mix of fear and longing. Catherine clutched her teacup with trembling hands, her bony fingers revealing the months of deprivation on the streets. Her eyes never left her daughters, as if she feared they might vanish again. "You look different, Marie," she said softly. "Your hair is longer." Marie instinctively touched the ends of her hair, now healthy and styled in neat braids, thanks to Thomas's daily care. "Anne, too," Catherine went on, her voice catching. "You both look so healthy." "Mrs. Rose takes care of us," Anne answered, her tone still guarded. "She'd never leave us out in the cold." Catherine flinched, as though struck. Her hands dove into the worn pockets of her coat, searching for something. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," her voice quavered, "but I need you to understand, to know about your grandmother." She pulled out a wrinkled photograph, smoothing its creases reverently. "It's the only thing I managed to keep, not even the music box." "Mrs." Rose watched every motion carefully, noticing how Catherine's gestures mirrored her own, the way her hands trembled, the slight tilt of her head. "This is my mother." Catherine extended the photo. "Louise, with her. We never went without, even though it was just the two of us. She worked 2 jobs but still found time to sing to me, to tend to plants." Marie inched closer at the mention of plants. Catherine caught the movement. "You got that from her?" She smiled sadly. "Your knack for flowers." Her voice broke as Mrs. Rose took the photograph. The moment the elderly woman laid eyes on it would remain etched in Thomas's memory. He stood by the door, sensing the weight of that instant. There was Louise, her Louise, smiling with the same smile he saw every day in Marie, holding a baby, Catherine, just like in the only photo Mrs. Rose had with her own newborn before she was taken away. The teacup in Mrs. Rose's hand fell, shattering on the floor. No one moved to pick up the pieces. "She was amazing," Catherine continued, unaware of the elderly woman's reaction. "Even when she got sick, she never complained, worked until she couldn't stand anymore." "Sick?" Mrs. Rose's voice was barely audible. "Cancer," Catherine answered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "It happened so fast. Within 6 months she was gone, and I was pregnant, alone with no one. The twins, feeling their mother's pain, fidgeted uneasily. Anne squeezed Marie's hand in comfort. She always said the brooch was special," Catherine added, looking at the piece her daughters now wore, "that it was the only thing she brought from the orphanage. She said one day we'd understand its importance." Mrs. Rose couldn't tear her eyes from the photograph. Louise had her eyes, her smile, even the way she tilted her head slightly to the right, a quirk she now saw in Catherine. "When the twins were born," Catherine continued, wiping her tears, "I tried to be strong like she was, but with no help, no example. I lost my way. Money ran out. Rent was overdue. I couldn't buy food." "Why didn't you seek help?" Anne asked, her small voice tinged with hurt. "Pride," Catherine replied after a moment. "The same pride my mom had. She never accepted help from anyone, always said we could handle things on our own." "What was she like?" Marie asked softly, taking a hesitant step toward her mom. "Grandma Louise." Catherine smiled through her tears. Strong, determined. She had a laugh that lit up the room. She sang all the time, especially that French tune. "Claire de Lune," Mrs. Rose finished, her voice trembling. "Yes," Catherine frowned, surprised. "How do you know that?" But Mrs. Rose did not answer. Her hands shook so much that Thomas quickly stepped in to steady the photograph before it slipped from her grasp. "When she passed," Catherine went on, "it was like the ground vanished beneath my feet. And then I found out I was pregnant, with twins. I tried, I swear I tried, to be strong like she was, but each day got harder, until you left us on that bench," Anne concluded. "I left the brooch with you," Catherine sobbed. "It was the only valuable thing we had, the only link to our past. Mom said it held a secret, that someday—" "The secret of a winter night," Mrs. Rose interjected, her voice barely a whisper. "Of a young mother who only got to hold her daughter once." Catherine stopped speaking, staring at the elderly woman in confusion. Thomas saw the exact moment her eyes fell on the brooch pinned to Mrs. Rose's blouse, identical to the one she'd left with her children. "How—" Catherine began, but her voice failed her. Mrs. Rose finally tore her gaze from the photograph, meeting Catherine's eyes. It was like looking through time. Those same eyes she had seen in her newborn daughter, now reflected in the face of her granddaughter. "Your mother," she began, tears slipping down her cheeks, "was born one winter night, 50 years ago." Silence enveloped them. Even the twins, who didn't fully grasp the situation, seemed to hold their breath. Thomas discreetly began collecting the broken pieces of the teacup, his heart aching at the scene unfolding. Through the conservatory windows, Marie's daisies swayed gently in the breeze, silent witnesses to a 50-year-old secret finally coming to light. The Laurent Mansion's conservatory felt heavy with the weight of 50 years of secrets on the verge of being revealed. The twins, sensing the intensity, had pressed themselves close to Mrs. Rose. Catherine remained still, her eyes locked on the identical brooch the elderly woman wore. Thomas brought a shawl to drape over Mrs. Rose's shoulders. She was trembling slightly, and not from the cold. "It was 1975, Mrs. Rose began, her voice scarcely above a whisper. "I was 18 and studying music at college." Her hands found the brooch on her chest, a gesture Thomas had seen countless times, but which now carried a different gravity. His name was James. He played piano, taught private lessons to pay for his own studies. A sad smile flickered across her face. "He was the one who introduced me to Claire de Lune." Catherine raised her hand to her mouth, recognizing the song her mother had cherished. "When I found out I was pregnant, James just disappeared, transferred to another university, moved to another city. I was left alone to face my family." Marie, always the most sensitive, climbed silently into Mrs. Rose's lap. The elderly woman hugged her as if the contact gave her strength to go on. The Lawrence were one of the most traditional families in town. A pregnancy out of wedlock was... She paused, searching for the words. "Unforgivable. My father, to avoid scandal, sent me to a rest home in the countryside. Her discreet place," he said, "where I could have the baby away from society's eyes." Anne moved closer, sitting at the foot of the wheelchair. Catherine remained motionless, absorbing every word as if her life depended on it. "The pregnancy was lonely," Mrs. Rose continued, "but in a way happy too. I sang every night, and the baby. She moved so much when I sang Claire de Lune. Just like Mom did for us," Marie whispered, making Catherine sob quietly. "She was born on a winter night." Mrs. Rose closed her eyes, the painful memories surfacing vividly. "So tiny, so perfect. They let me hold her just once, for a single photo." Her trembling fingers reached into a small pouch on her wheelchair, pulling out the same photo the twins had found in the music box days earlier. "Before they took her," her voice broke, "I managed to pin the brooch to her blanket. It was all I could leave her. A piece of my heart, a silent promise that one day..." Catherine took the photo with shaking hands. It was the same scene she had seen hundreds of times in her own picture. Her mother as a newborn, with a golden brooch pinned to the blanket. "When I woke up the next morning," Mrs. Rose continued, "she was gone. My family had arranged the adoption without my consent. They said it was better that way, that I was too young, that I could move on." "But you never forgot," Anne said softly. "Never," Mrs. Rose confirmed. "I spent 50 years looking for her. Hired detectives, scoured adoption records, followed every clue. But I never found anything." Catherine was weeping openly now, tears falling onto the photo. "Mom always said the brooch was special," she whispered, "that someday we'd understand why. She spent hours just staring at it, like she was trying to remember." "Babies remember," Mrs. Rose said gently. "Not with their minds, but with their hearts. That's why she loved Claire de Lune so much, even without knowing why." Thomas watched Catherine move slowly toward the wheelchair, sinking to her knees before Mrs. Rose. Their eyes, identical, were wide with dawning comprehension. "The brooch." Catherine touched the piece on Mrs. Rose's chest with trembling fingers. "All this time, it was a message, a promise. For my daughter," Mrs. Rose finished, tears running freely now. "For my Louise." The twins watched, captivated, starting to grasp the implications. "So," Marie said slowly, Your great-grandmother," Mrs. Rose answered gently. "The mother of your grandmother, Louise." Catherine let out a sob. 50 years of family history suddenly falling into place. The brooch her mother cherished, the song that comforted them, even her own love of music. It was all an echo through the generations, a legacy passed down silently. "That's why you feel so at home here," Anne said to Marie in realization. "That's why Mrs. Rose loves your way with flowers." "Just like Louise," Catherine and Mrs. Rose said at the same time, then exchanged surprised looks. Thomas discreetly wiped away a tear. In 3 decades serving the Laurent family, he never imagined witnessing this moment. 4 generations of women separated by fate, finally reunited by a simple golden brooch. "I'm sorry," Catherine whispered, still on her knees, "for leaving my daughters. I couldn't cope with losing Mom, with the pregnancy, with everything." "Sometimes, Mrs. Rose responded softly, touching her granddaughter's cheek. "The choices we make out of fear lead us exactly where we need to be." Marie and Anne, moving as one, embraced their mother for the first time since her return. Catherine wrapped her arms around them, sobbing. "Can we—" she hesitated, looking at Mrs. Rose. "Can we stay? All of us?" The elderly woman smiled through her tears, opening her arms to include Catherine in the embrace she already shared with the twins. "This was always your home," she said, "even when we didn't know it." Thomas watched a moment longer before leaving quietly. In the conservatory, Marie's daisies swayed in the breeze, as if celebrating the moment. He smiled, thinking how fate can take strange turns to correct its own mistakes. 50 years, 2 generations, and 1 golden brooch later, the Laurent family was finally whole. Night had fallen over the Laurent mansion, but no one was thinking of sleep. In the great hall, Thomas had lit the fireplace, creating a cozy setting where now 4 generations of women shared long-held stories. Mrs. Rose held the golden brooch in her wrinkled hands, tracing its delicate rose engravings with her fingers. Marie, curled up in her lap as had become her habit, watched with fascination. "It had belonged to your great-great-grandmother Rose, the first," Mrs. Rose explained softly. "She received it as a gift in Paris, then had 2 identical ones made, one for me and the other meant for my future daughter." Catherine, seated on the rug at the foot of the wheelchair with Anne leaning against her shoulder, listened intently. "Mom used to sleep with it under her pillow," Catherine revealed, making Mrs. Rose catch her breath. "She said she had good dreams when the brooch was nearby." "What kind of dreams?" Mrs. Rose asked, her voice trembling slightly. "About music." Catherine smiled through her tears. "Always about music. Especially Claire de Lune." They all finished in unison, making the twins smile. Thomas, serving hot chocolate for everyone, noticed how his employer tried to hide her tears. In 3 decades, he had never seen her so vulnerable or so alive. "What was she like?" Mrs. Rose asked softly. "Day to day with you." Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, searching for the best memories. "Strong," she began. "Incredibly strong. She worked as a nurse by day and taught piano at night. But she always found time to bake cookies on Sundays." "Chocolate cookies?" Marie asked excitedly. "With extra chips," Catherine smiled. "Just like Thomas makes for you." The butler paused, surprised. He had only started making the extra chocolate version after seeing how much the twins loved them. Yet another unconscious echo passed through the generations. "And flowers," Catherine continued, looking at Marie. "Our apartment was tiny, but she turned the balcony into a real garden. She said flowers have the power to heal the soul." Mrs. Rose sobbed softly. "My mother, the first Rose, said exactly the same thing." Anne picked up the brooch she wore, studying it with new eyes. "Is that why you got so upset when you saw us wearing it?" "Yes, dear." Mrs. Rose ran a hand over her granddaughter's hair. "It was like 50 years of searching ended in a single moment. That brooch was my only link to Louise, proof that night in the hospital wasn't just a dream. She stared at it for hours, Catherine recalled, especially on tough days, and she always said, "One day we'll understand, daughter. One day this brooch will share its story." "And it did," Marie commented quietly, placing her brooch next to Mrs. Rose's. "Look, they're like mirrors." The two brooches, side by side, shone under the firelight, identical in every detail, each rose engraving and golden curve, 50 years apart, now together at last. "She had your eyes," Catherine continued, gazing at Mrs. Rose with fresh understanding, "and your smile. Now it makes sense why I've always felt so connected to certain music, certain flowers." "Blood remembers," Mrs. Rose whispered, "even when the mind forgets." "Like when Marie started arranging flowers just the way you like them," Anne observed. "Or when you sang Clair de Lune without ever fully learning the words," Catherine added, making Anne blush. Thomas watched, his heart full. The similarities were staggering. Marie's gift with flowers, so much like Mrs. Rose's youth, Anne's musical talent, echoing generations of piano teachers, even Catherine's small mannerisms, echoing her mother. "Louise had a dream," Catherine said after a moment of silence. "She wanted to open a music school for underprivileged children. She started saving money, but then she fell ill." Mrs. Rose squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "We can make that dream come true," she said softly, in her memory. Catherine looked at her grandmother with wide eyes. "How you would do that?" "Louise was my daughter," Mrs. Rose answered, her voice breaking. "Even though I never got to raise her, even though I lost all those years, she was always mine. And through you, through the twins, I can finally know her." Marie picked up both brooches and, in a gesture as natural as breathing, pinned one on Catherine's dress and returned the other to Mrs. Rose. "Now we're all connected," she said simply. Thomas quietly slipped out of the hall, leaving the 4 generations of Laurent women to share more stories, more memories, more discoveries about Louise. Outside in the garden, Marie's daisies gleamed under the moonlight, like small stars bearing witness to the moment, a circle broken 50 years before finally closed. The brooch had kept its promise. Across 5 decades, 2 adoptions, 1 abandonment, and a fateful reunion, it had at last brought the entire family home. Chapter 11, Target 12, Transformation and Healing. The Laurent mansion awoke to a new reality in the week following all these revelations. Autumn arrived slowly, painting the garden leaves in shades of gold and red, as though nature itself wished to mark the start of this new chapter. Catherine, still bearing the visible marks of her months on the street, spent hours lurking in the mansion's corridors, watching her daughters interact with Mrs. Rose. Her thin, tense body revealed her inner conflict between wanting to draw closer and the weight of guilt she still carried. Every morning, she witnessed the same ritual. Anne, surprisingly gentle for a 5-year-old, helped Mrs. Rose with her breakfast. The little girl knew the routine perfectly. First the medications, then a cup of tea with 2 teaspoons of sugar, toast with strawberry jam on Tuesdays and Thursdays, oatmeal with honey on the other days. "Grandma likes it when I blow on her tea 3 times before I hand it to her," Anne explained one day to Thomas, who smiled at the realization that Mrs. Rose had done that same gesture in her youth. Meanwhile, Marie had turned the conservatory into her personal kingdom. Each morning, before the sun fully rose, she was already among the flowers, whispering to them as if they were old friends. Her small hands, once raw from the cold streets, now moved with impressive skill among the plants. "The daisies need more sunlight," she declared one morning, surprising Thomas with her certainty. "And the lilies are too crowded." The butler, who had served 3 generations of Laurent women, recognized in Marie the same innate gift Mrs. Rose had shown in her youth, and which, from Catherine's stories, Louise also possessed. During one of these mornings of quiet observation, the first real change happened. Catherine, who until then had kept her distance, noticed Anne struggling to reach a medicine bottle on a high shelf. "Let me help," she offered, her voice shaking with nerves. Anne froze for a moment, then nodded slightly. Catherine grabbed the bottle and, on impulse, began reading the label aloud. 2 drops in the morning with breakfast, she recited, instantly recalling how her mother had taught her to handle medications for patients. How do you know that? Anne asked, her curiosity momentarily dispelling her caution. Your Grandma Louise, Catherine replied softly, was a nurse. She taught me to read medicine labels before I could even read storybooks. Mrs. Rose, watching the scene from her chair, felt her heart clench. Another tiny insight into her lost daughter's life. She not only cared for others, but also passed along that knowledge. The mansion's physical transformation began with the conservatory. Thomas hired specialized artisans to restore the Art Nouveau stained glass panels that had been hidden behind heavy drapes for decades. When light shone through the colorful panes once more, creating patterns across the marble floor, Marie was enchanted. "Mom, look!" she exclaimed, forgetting her shyness with Catherine for a moment. The lights look like dancing flowers. Just like in our old apartment, Catherine answered softly. Your Grandma Louise used to hang crystals in the kitchen window to create the same effect. Mrs. Rose, who now spent increasing amounts of time in the conservatory, raised her eyebrows with interest. She liked light and color. Very much, Catherine smiled, lost in thought. Even though our apartment was small, she always said color and light don't take up space. They fill your soul. Like you, Grandma, Marie observed, repositioning a vase of daisies. You always talk about that too. The restoration spread throughout the mansion. Thomas supervised every detail, consulting old photos to recreate the house's original splendor. The East Wing, chosen to house Catherine and the twins, underwent a complete makeover. This wallpaper, Thomas said as workers peeled away old layers in Catherine's future room, was the mansion's original pattern. I found a roll in the attic with a note from the first Rose Laurent. Beneath the wallpaper, they discovered a surprise, small hand-painted roses on the walls. My goodness, Mrs. Rose gasped when summoned. My mother used to talk about these. She said the first Rose painted them for her daughter. Just like Grandma Louise painted my room when I was a baby, Catherine murmured, touching the designs reverently. The kitchen, Thomas's territory for 3 decades, also underwent change. Catherine began appearing early in the morning to help prepare breakfast, bringing with her memories of her childhood breakfasts. Mum always added cinnamon to the oatmeal, she explained one day, helping Thomas. She said it was the secret to starting the day with love. Mrs. Rose does the same, Anne exclaimed from the doorway, where she watched the adults work. The twins' rooms took on distinct personalities. For Marie, Thomas oversaw the installation of special shelves with lights for her plants. During the renovation, they discovered a set of antique pots in the attic. They belonged to my grandmother, Mrs. Rose explained when the pots were cleaned up. She brought them from Paris when she got married. Grandma Louise had one just like this, Marie noted, holding a blue porcelain pot. But it broke when we moved the last time. It wasn't just like it, dear, Mrs. Rose gently corrected her. It was this one. It must have been among the things I left with her that night. Anne's room was transformed into a small musical haven. Thomas discovered a vertical Steinway piano in one of the mansion's many closed-off rooms, an heirloom from the first Rose Laurent. It'll need restoration, he admitted, but its sound is still lovely. While the piano restorer worked, they found old sheet music stored inside. Among them were several copies of Clair de Lune, some with handwritten notes. These markings, Catherine said, studying the notes, they look exactly like Mom's handwriting. That's my handwriting, Mrs. Rose revealed, her voice shaking. I used to make notes on those scores when I studied piano. Louise must have picked up the same habit unknowingly. The connections kept surfacing in the smallest details, like when they discovered both Catherine and Mrs. Rose organized books by color, not author, or that Marie shared the same strawberry allergy as her great-grandmother. The library underwent a special renovation. Thomas hired carpenters to install new shelves, creating specific spaces for each resident's books. During construction, they found an old collection of French fairy tales. It was my favorite childhood book, Mrs. Rose recalled upon seeing the collection. I used to imagine reading it to my daughter someday. Mom read these stories to me every night, Catherine revealed, turning the yellowed pages. In French, even though she didn't speak the language, she said the tales sounded more magical that way. The music room became the mansion's lively heart. While cleaning, Thomas discovered a set of vinyl records carefully stored in an antique cabinet. All classical music, he explained, dusting off an old Victrola. Mrs. Rose once collected them. Mom too, Catherine exclaimed, scanning the albums. She had a small but cherished collection. She'd play Debussy to fall asleep. Anne, exploring the room with growing curiosity, found a box of handwritten sheet music in the cabinet's depths. Look, Grandma, it has your name on it. Mrs. Rose took the yellowed papers with trembling hands. They were her own youthful compositions, written during her pregnancy. I composed for her, she said softly. For Louise. Every night, I'd sit at the piano and let the music express everything I couldn't say. Catherine drew nearer, her eyes fixed on the manuscripts. Mom composed too. Small pieces, nothing too elaborate, but she always said they were for me. Daily routines settled in naturally. Mornings began early, with Marie tending her plants while Thomas and Catherine prepared breakfast. Anne assisted Mrs. Rose with her morning routine, a ritual that became more cherished each day. Your hand is as gentle as Grandma Louise's must have been, Mrs. Rose remarked one day as Anne brushed her hair. She was a nurse, right? She must have had kind hands for her patients. Mum says she used to sing to them, Anne replied, focusing on the gentle strokes of the brush. Like I sing to you at bedtime. Afternoons were devoted to music and reading. Catherine discovered she had not only inherited her mother's love of music, but also the same natural talent found in the Laurent line. Under Mrs. Rose's patient guidance, she began reacquainting herself with the piano. Your fingers move exactly like mine, the elderly woman observed during a lesson. As though your body remembers something your mind never learned. The old ballroom, locked for decades, was reopened and transformed into an informal sitting room. The Venetian mirrors were polished to their original shine, and the crystal chandeliers sparkled once again. Grandma, Marie asked one afternoon, admiring the final result, why was this room locked? Mrs. Rose hesitated, her hands moving to her brooch, an emotional reflex they all recognized by now. It was in here, she finally said, that I found out I was pregnant with Louise, during a spring dance, after they took her away. I couldn't step inside again. Catherine, fluffing cushions on a nearby sofa, froze at that. Mum once told me her happiest moment was discovering she was pregnant with me. Said she danced alone all night out of pure joy. Thomas, watching from the doorway, noted how the 4 generations of Laurent women seemed linked by invisible threads of shared memories, some clear, others carried silently in their blood. The most significant transformation took place in the attic. While sorting through crates, they found trunks of old clothes from the first Rose Laurent down to a young Mrs. Rose. Among them, a box of hats caught Catherine's eye. That smell, she murmured, opening one of the boxes. Lavender and vanilla. My mother's perfume, Mrs. Rose said from the attic door, where Thomas had wheeled her in. She kept little sachets of lavender and vanilla in all her boxes. Louise did the same, Catherine replied, tears silently falling. All our clothes smelled like this. The twins, rummaging through other trunks, found a collection of porcelain dolls. Look, Mom, Marie exclaimed, holding one dressed in blue. It's just like the one Grandma Louise gave me on my birthday. Not just like it, Mrs. Rose corrected, her voice trembling. It is the same. It was my favorite doll when I was a child. I left it with Louise at the hospital. The attic's revelations continued. In a particularly old trunk, they found a christening gown, carefully preserved in tissue paper. It was mine, Mrs. Rose explained, touching the yellowed fabric. And then it was Louise's. And mine too, Catherine whispered, recognizing the delicate embroidery. Mom kept it in a special box. Said it was our only real family heirloom. It was after these attic explorations that Mrs. Rose finally made her decision. She gathered everyone in the main hall one evening after dinner. Thomas had prepared tea and cookies, and the crackling fire set a warm atmosphere. "This mansion," Mrs. Rose began, looking around at the faces that had become so dear to her, "has been empty for far too long. 50 years of silence and loneliness, waiting for something I couldn't name." Catherine, seated nearby with the twins, listened carefully, her hands clasped with her daughter's. "Now I understand," Mrs. Rose continued, her voice steady. "The house was waiting for you. Every empty room, every quiet corridor, all of it waiting to be filled with life again." "Madam," Catherine started, but Mrs. Rose gently cut her off. "No, dear. To you, I'm simply Grandma, and I want you and the girls to stay here, not as guests, but as family, the way it always should have been. But after what I did," Catherine hesitated, tears filling her eyes. "I abandoned my children, and I lost Louise," Mrs. Rose replied softly. "Not by choice, but I lost her. Fate separated us, but now it's brought us back together. Through you, through these little ones. It's as if Louise is here too." Marie stood and approached her great-grandmother's wheelchair, climbing into her lap as she often did. "Can we really stay forever, Grandma?" "Forever," Mrs. Rose confirmed, hugging the child. "Thomas." "Yes, madam?" "Prepare the east wing, the 3 rooms near mine. It's time this house became a true home again." In the days that followed, the mansion underwent its final transformation. Thomas oversaw the move with the efficiency of one who knew every nook and cranny of the place. The rooms were set up for their new residents, preserving elements that connected the generations. In Catherine's room, the old vanity of the first Rose Laurent took pride of place. The walls below, with their uncovered rose designs, were delicately restored. A reading chair was placed near the window, just like Louise's favorite spot. For Marie, along with the space for her plants, Thomas arranged a small fountain, its gentle trickle reminiscent of the creek near the old apartment she'd shared with Louise. The shelves were stocked with botany books, some as old as the mansion itself. Anne's room now revolved around music, the restored piano standing front and center. The sheet music they had found was framed, creating a musical timeline of the Laurent family. From Mrs. Rose's compositions to Anne's budding melodies, the mansion came alive. Formerly silent hallways now resonated with laughter and music. The garden flourished under Marie's and Catherine's care. Evenings were filled with stories and songs, each moment revealing more links between the generations. One particularly significant morning, Thomas found all 4 Laurent women gathered in the conservatory. Mrs. Rose sat in her chair, Catherine at the piano, Anne singing while Marie arranged flowers. Sunlight filtered through the restored stained glass, projecting dancing colors around them. That was when he noticed they were all wearing the golden brooches. The original pair that had once separated mother and daughter 50 years ago, now reunited and magnified in meaning, uniting 4 generations of Laurent women. "Thomas," Mrs. Rose called, noticing him, "look at them. It's as though time doesn't exist, isn't it? As if 50 years were just the blink of an eye." The butler smiled, taking in how Catherine played Claire de Lune on the piano. Anne sang with the same sweet tone Louise must have had, and Marie arranged flowers exactly like her great-grandmother had in her youth. "Time doesn't exist for certain things, madam," he replied gently. "Love, music, flowers, some legacies are eternal." The Laurent mansion, for so long merely an empty shell of old sorrow, had finally become what it was always meant to be. A home where past and present coexisted in harmony, where 4 generations of women rediscovered bonds that even 50 years of separation could not sever. And each night, as the final notes of Claire de Lune echoed through now vibrant corridors, it was as though Louise were also there, smiling through the generations, finally at peace, seeing her family reunited exactly as destiny had always intended. Life settled into a rhythm at the Laurent mansion in the months that followed. Winter was beginning to bow out, taking with it the last traces of the loneliness that had once haunted those halls. Mornings now began earlier. Catherine, slowly regaining her health and confidence, was always the first to wake. Thomas would find her in the kitchen before dawn, preparing tea with the same meticulous care her mother had once shown. "Louise said tea requires attention," she explained one morning, measuring the leaves carefully. "Like a patient, each one needs the right timing." "Just as Mrs. Rose always says," Thomas remarked, watching her. She spent hours teaching the staff to prepare her morning tea properly. Catherine smiled at yet another similarity discovered. Her body, once so worn down by life on the streets, was gradually regaining strength. Regular meals and the comfort of a real home worked wonders not only for her physical health, but also for her soul. Marie was the second to rise, eager to check her plants before breakfast. The conservatory, now her personal domain, blossomed under her devoted care. She had taken to talking to each bloom as she watered them, exactly as Mrs. Rose had done in her youth, another generational echo in which no explanation was needed. "The orchids look different today," she noted one morning, frowning exactly as Louise used to. "They miss the sunlight." "Your Grandma Louise said the same thing," Catherine replied, helping her daughter move the pots. She always understood plants better than any botany book. It was Anne's job to wake Mrs. Rose each morning. Initially a necessity, it had become a treasured ritual. The little girl entered her great-grandmother's room quietly, drew the curtains to let in the morning light little by little, and then began to hum softly, always Claire de Lune, the tune that flowed in the Laurent bloodline. "Did you know, Mrs. Rose said one morning as Anne helped her with her robe, that when Louise was a newborn in the hospital, she only settled down if I played that song." Anne paused, absorbing yet another piece of her family's history. "Mom used to sing it to us when we were babies, but she didn't know the words, only the melody, because that's how Louise used to sing it to her," Mrs. Rose added softly. "Some things the heart remembers, even when the mind forgets." Their days found a comfortable structure. After breakfast, while Marie tended her flowers and Anne practiced piano, Catherine helped Mrs. Rose with her correspondence, a task Thomas once handled but which had naturally passed to the granddaughter. "Your handwriting, Mrs. Rose observed one day as Catherine addressed envelopes, "looks just like mine at your age, slanted to the right with soft curves." Catherine looked up, surprised. "Mom always teased me about it, said it seemed too old-fashioned for someone so young." "Because it was the handwriting she had seen on the few documents I managed to leave with her," Mrs. Rose explained, tears glimmering in her eyes. Another thing that survived through time without our knowledge. Afternoons were for music and storytelling. The newly restored music room, once silent and dusty, was filled with life. Anne displayed a natural gift for the piano, her small hands gliding across the keys with the same grace Mrs. Rose once had. Catherine, relearning the instrument, often paused mid-piece, struck by a sudden memory. "Mom used to play this part differently," she would say, her hands instinctively finding the variation Louise had introduced years ago, a unique interpretation Mrs. Rose now learned from her granddaughter. Evenings, however, were the most cherished. After dinner, they all gathered in Mrs. Rose's room, a habit that started naturally and soon became tradition. Catherine would sit on the rug by the wheelchair, the twins curled up beside or in her lap, or busy playing on the plush carpet. It was then that stories of Louise flowed most freely. Catherine shared her childhood memories, baking cookies together on Sundays, bedtime stories, small yet meaningful gestures of love, even as Louise juggled 2 jobs. She never stopped hoping she'd find her family, Catherine revealed one night, her voice thick with emotion. She rarely talked about it, but sometimes I'd catch her looking at the brooch, as if it might speak its secrets. "And it did," Marie said sleepily, fingering the brooch she now wore. "It brought us home." Thomas, who often lingered under the pretense of tidying something, observed how these nightly conversations healed old wounds. He saw how Mrs. Rose clung to every new detail about her lost daughter, how Catherine gradually replaced her guilt with a resolve to do better, how the twins blossomed under the love of 3 generations of women. The mansion itself seemed to respond to the presence of a reunited family. Once austere corridors now displayed the twins' drawings, potted plants in corners, and the sound of music through open windows. What once was just a big, empty house now felt like a living, breathing home. Subtle signs of healing appeared in everyday details, like Catherine's discovery that she fit perfectly into Mrs. Rose's old dresses, just as Louise had. Or the way Marie, without prompting, began arranging flowers precisely as her great-grandmother had half a century ago. One especially poignant night, as they all shared stories in Mrs. Rose's bedroom, Anne started playing a tune on the small piano they'd moved there. It was an original composition, blending elements of Claire de Lune with something entirely new. "It's for Grandma Louise," she explained shyly, "so she knows we're all together now." Mrs. Rose wept quietly. Catherine embraced her. Marie fell asleep to the piano's notes, and Thomas, watching from the door, realized that some miracles take 50 years to happen. But when they do, they heal not only the present but also the entire past. The Laurent mansion, which had once been a monument to loss and isolation, had finally become what it was always meant to be, a home where 4 generations of women found their place, where love, like Marie's garden flowers, bloomed freely, healing old wounds and laying strong roots for the future. And each night, as the last notes of Anne's piano drifted through the once silent halls, it was as though Louise herself was there, smiling through time, finally at peace to see her family whole, exactly as it always should have been. Spring returned to the Laurent mansion, completing a cycle that began on a frigid winter night. The garden, now under Marie's devoted care, burst with color, daisies, roses, and lilies dancing in the gentle morning breeze. Thomas was overseeing the installation of a special frame in the main hall. It was a unique piece commissioned from Paris, made of crystal and gold, worthy of housing the 2 brooches that after 50 years had brought a family together. Around the brooches, photographs told a story, a young Mrs. Rose with baby Louise, Louise grown up, holding a small Catherine, Catherine with newborn twins, and finally, a new picture, 4 generations of Laurent women smiling at the camera, their bond and resemblance undeniable. "It's perfect," Mrs. Rose said, admiring the finished display from her wheelchair. Her face, once lined with decades of sorrow, now bore a serenity Thomas had never seen. Catherine entered, carrying a tea tray, a ritual she had taken on naturally, turning it into a shared moment of connection with her grandmother. "The girls are in the garden," she announced, setting down the tray in the same meticulous manner Louise once had. "Marie insists her roses need a morning chat." "Just like you used to do, madam," Thomas added gently, noting the bright smile that lit Mrs. Rose's face. Through the French windows, they could see the twins outside. Marie, kneeling among the flowers, was talking animatedly to each plant, while Anne softly hummed Claire de Lune, the same song that connected the family across generations. "Sometimes," Mrs. Rose said, her voice filled with emotion, "I look at them and see Louise. The way Marie is with flowers, how Anne furrows her brow in concentration. It's as if time doesn't exist." Catherine approached her grandmother, taking her hand. A year ago, she had been a desperate mother, abandoning her children on a bench. Now, transformed by love and acceptance, she had found not only a home but also her true identity. "Mom would be happy," she said softly, "seeing her granddaughters grow up here in the home that should have been hers too." "She is here," Mrs. Rose replied, squeezing her granddaughter's hand. "In every flower Marie plants, in every note Anne plays, in every gesture of yours that reminds me of her." Thomas watched with a full heart. The mansion, which for so long was merely a hollow vessel of old memories, now pulsed with new life. The corridors, once so silent, now echoed with children's laughter, music, and friendly chatter. The walls that had once witnessed deep sorrow now hosted daily moments of joy. He recalled the night he'd found the twins shivering in the cold. Who would have guessed that those 2 little figures would bring about such change? That his simple act of compassion would set off a chain of events capable of healing 50 years of pain. The afternoon wore on lazily, the sun casting golden shadows through the restored stained glass windows. The twins returned from the garden, bringing with them the scent of blossoms and the energy of youth. "Grandma," Marie called, rushing to show what she was carefully holding. "Look what I found in the garden." It was a tiny rosebud, small yet resilient, growing alone in a far corner of the grounds. "It's from that old rose bush you planted a long time ago," Marie explained proudly. "The one you told me once belonged to the first Rose Laurent." Mrs. Rose touched the bud gently, tears running silently down her cheeks. "I thought it died years ago," she whispered. "How did it survive all this time?" "Some things are too strong to die," Anne commented wisely, sitting at her great-grandmother's feet. "Like family love." Nightfall came softly to the Laurent mansion. As usual, the twins took it upon themselves to help Mrs. Rose prepare for bed, a task that had evolved from obligation into a cherished expression of love. "Can I sing the new song I learned?" Anne asked while assisting with the robe. "The one you composed," Marie chimed in, plumping the pillows as she did her plants. "Of course, my dears." Mrs. Rose smiled, watching how the two coordinated their efforts in perfect harmony. Catherine appeared at the door, carrying a cup of evening tea Louise used to brew. She paused to take in the scene, her daughters tending to their great-grandmother so lovingly, Anne's gentle melody filling the room, and Marie's floral scent wafting from the bedside table. Thomas, on his final rounds for the evening, also stopped to observe. The family he'd served for 3 decades was finally complete. The circle broken one winter night half a century ago was now closed on a spring evening. Settled in her bed with the twins' help, Mrs. Rose gazed at a newly hung photo on the wall, one of all 4 together, each wearing the shining golden brooch, identical smiles lighting their faces. "You know," she said quietly, as Anne began to play her new composition, "sometimes we have to be lost in the cold to find our way home." Marie, sleepy, snuggled beside her. "But now we'll never be cold again, right, Grandma?" "No, my darling," Mrs. Rose replied, embracing the child as Anne played and Catherine watched with tears in her eyes. "Now we have the real treasure. We have each other." Thomas closed the door gently, leaving the family to their private moment. Outside, stars shone above the Laurent mansion, and in the garden, that tiny rosebud prepared to bloom. Another promise that some bonds are too strong to break, some loves too deep to forget, and some treasures too precious to remain lost forever.